So today, we're going to look at history a little differently. We're going to dive into the stories of Native American tribes whose greatest victories weren't about war, but about something way harder to see: the quiet, stubborn act of survival.
I mean, this is the image we all have in our heads, right? You think of epic conflicts, famous chiefs, tragic defeats. It's the story that fills our textbooks and our movies. But it's only one part of a much bigger, more complicated story.
And that's really the big question for today. What if survival itself was the most powerful form of resistance? What if the goal wasn't just to fight, but to endure? You know, to simply live? We're going to look at 3 incredible examples of this. We'll explore tribes who totally mastered the art of adaptation, using strategies that were so successful they were often rendered invisible to the history books.
All right, our first story starts with a people who chose not to run, not to fight some huge war, but to hold their ground by becoming an undeniable part of the landscape itself. Let's meet the Lumbee.
Deep in the swamps and forests of North Carolina, the Lumbee carved out a really unique existence. I mean, they watched as other tribes were forcibly removed during tragedies like the Trail of Tears, and yet they stayed. So the big question is, how did they pull that off?
Well, their strategy was really proactive and one of a kind. They built this strong, self-reliant community. Because of their blended Native, European, and African ancestry, they didn't really fit neatly into the rigid racial boxes of the time. Now, this ambiguity, along with their deep-rooted community, actually helped them avoid being forced onto reservations. And get this, instead of waiting for the government to recognize them, they just built their own schools and their own churches, creating an infrastructure that made them a permanent, undeniable part of the landscape.
And this quote just nails it. It was this delicate balancing act. They weren't hiding, not at all, but they also weren't drawing the kind of attention that would lead to conflict or removal. They just navigated a super complex world by being present, persistent, and totally self-reliant.
Okay, let's move on. If the Lumbees survived by staying put, our next group, the Abenaki, survived by doing the absolute opposite. Their whole strategy was rooted in constant, purposeful movement.
The Abenaki homeland stretched all across what we now know as New England and parts of Canada, and this huge forested territory wasn't just a place to live. It was their greatest defense.
So here's what that actually looked like. The Abenaki lifestyle was basically built for evasion. They didn't have these large permanent towns that were just easy targets. Instead, they lived in small, mobile family groups, moving with the seasons to hunt and fish. So when conflict with English settlers came up, they had options. They could melt deeper into the forest, they could cross the newly drawn border into Canada, or they could even blend in with allied French communities. This constant motion made them incredibly hard to pin down.
And that's the absolute key. To a colonial government trying to count, control, or conquer them, the Abenaki were like smoke. They were everywhere and nowhere all at once. This invisibility wasn't a sign of disappearance. No, it was a really sophisticated strategy of cultural preservation and survival.
All right, our final story gives us yet another model of survival. This one isn't based on social blending or constant motion, but on a deep, symbiotic relationship with the land itself.
So now let's head over to the great forests of Wisconsin, the ancestral home of the Menominee Nation. At a time when so many tribes were losing their land to logging and settlement, the Menominee did something totally different. They turned their land into their greatest source of strength. What the Menominee did was, well, it was revolutionary. Instead of selling off their timber for a quick buck, they pioneered a system of sustainable forestry. They would selectively harvest trees, only taking what the forest could naturally replace. This wasn't just about ecology, it was a brilliant economic and political strategy. It gave them financial independence, which meant they didn't have to rely on government payments. This economic strength, combined with really strong unified tribal leadership, allowed them to resist pressure and protect their land in a way very few others could.
And here is the stunning result of that foresight. I mean, just look at it. Their forest stands today as a living testament to a strategy that looked not just to the next year, but to the next 7 generations. Their land is their legacy and the proof of their victory.
So after looking at the Lumbee, the Abenaki, and the Menominee, a whole new picture of history starts to emerge. And it kind of forces us to ask, why aren't these incredible stories of victory more famous?
And this really gets to the heart of it. Our historical memory is just biased. We're drawn to the drama, to the conflict, to clear winners and losers. Wisdom, adaptation, and quiet persistence, they just don't make for loud headlines.
I mean, Think about it. These tribes didn't give historians the kind of stories they were traditionally looking for. There was no single heroic last stand, no big climactic named battle. Their victory was gradual, it was quiet, and it was woven into the fabric of daily life, which made it so much harder to see and honestly easier for history to just ignore.
This slide just sums it up perfectly. On the left, you've got the historical checklist for what we're taught is important, and on the right, you have the actual tools these tribes used to endure. The skills they actually needed for survival, adaptation, wisdom, strategic invisibility, were the very things that made them less likely to be remembered by a history obsessed with conflict.
And that's the ultimate takeaway here. In a world that was often designed to erase you, simply continuing to exist, to raise your children, to speak your language, to maintain your community is an incredibly profound act of defiance.
And this isn't some kind of consolation prize. It's not second place to winning a war. For the Lumbee, the Abenaki, the Menominee, and countless others, their continued presence today is the ultimate proof of their ancestors' success. Their survival was their victory.
And that leaves us with one last thought. If these incredible stories of resilience were so easily overlooked, it really makes you wonder, what other victories, what other forms of wisdom are still out there, just waiting in the quiet corners of history for us to find?